This is Ambazonia Calling. News, analysis, commentary, opinion, editorials. Ambazonia Calling is a co-production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. Welcome. My name is Ntumfoyn Herbert, and I bring revolutionary greetings from our studios in Washington, D.C. to all of you, friends of Ambazonia and fellow Ambazonians on Ground Zero and across the globe.
I'm innocent here. The violence must stop now, says the U.S. Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations about the ongoing conflict between La République du Cameroun and the occupied territories of Ambazonia.
This is now one of the fastest growing displacement processes in Africa.
The international community's observable lethargy and nonchalance about the genocidal actions of La République du Cameroun in Ambazonia has given way to a manufactured excitement in the Macabre drumbeats of La République's decentralization smokescreen. This is Divine Angel.
I am Manjong Jude Ambe. The international community wants the BIA regime to stop pretending that the crisis in Ambazonia does not exist.
Fighting terror is important, but nothing would be more un-American than for Washington to prioritize counterterrorism partnership with Cameroon over upholding the human rights, human dignity, and freedom for the people of Ambazonia. This is Brooke Stone.
The uncomfortable fact is that beneficiaries from the pillage and plunder of Ambazonian natural resources are using all tricks in the book to keep us in perpetual bondage. Tata Mentan.
We hail you, the Maxwell Obens, going blind in jail but standing strong. There shall be no retreat, no surrender. Lambert, Mbom.
As the Ambazonia refugee crisis persists, who is to blame? This is the mark.
The United Nations Security Council has ordered Paul Biya of the Republic of Cameroon to call a ceasefire, bringing an end to the senseless violence in the war he declared on the 30th of November last year against Ambazonia. Ambazonian freedom fighters who were forced to take up arms in self-defense are also being told to stand down. The UN Security Council has provided no deadline for when a ceasefire must be enforced, but has promised to remain seized of the issue, threatening to intervene in the interest of conflict prevention should the situation continue to deteriorate. We will delay our editorial for the week, beginning this edition right away with the first part of our news wrap-up for the week with Bobe Innocentia.
The violence must stop now, says the U.S. Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations about the ongoing conflict between La République du Cameroun and the occupied territories of Ambazonia.
October was the most violent month on record in Cameroon in recent years, and judging from anecdotal reports, we fear that November will surpass October as the bloodiest month on record. We don't want to see that horrible trend continue again this month, in December. The violence must stop now.
While Ambassador Jonathan Cohen entered into the public record at Thursday's United Nations Security Council briefing on Central Africa that violence between government and Anglophone separatists has resulted in killings and abductions of civilians, including a U.S. missionary who was killed on October 30th, he re-echoed the position of the United States government, calling for an immediate and broad-based reconciliatory dialogue without preconditions between the government of Cameroon and Ambazonians, urging belligerents to forswear violence, restore peace, and to resolve through political dialogue.
The stakes in Cameroon are too high for this crisis to continue unaddressed. Cameroon remains an essential security partner in the fight against Boko Haram and the Islamic State in West Africa, including as a member of the multinational Joint Task Force. The continuing crisis threatens to detract from our mutual security objectives in the Lake Chad Basin. Mr. President, the United States calls for an immediate and broad-based reconciliatory dialogue without preconditions between the government of Cameroon and separatists in the northwest and southwest regions.
Meantime, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has acknowledged that the situation of internally displaced persons in Ambazonia is the fastest rising crisis in Africa and must be addressed with urgency.
This is now one of the fastest growing displacement crises in Africa. The majority of the displaced are hiding in dense forests without adequate shelter and lacking food, water, and basic services. Schools and markets are also disrupted, and there are alarming health needs.
President Biya's order Thursday to discontinue proceedings pending before La République du Cameroon's kangaroo military tribunals against 289 Ambazonians has come under sustained attacks as several of the names are revealed to be either of dead people, have never been arrested at any point in time, or are flat-out citizens of La République du Cameroon with nothing to do with Ambazonia. Besides, restorationists across the board say discontinuing the sentencing of 289 out of several thousand Ambazonians abducted and locked up in prisons and dungeons across La République du Cameroon has no effect on the restoration quest. Social media chat rooms went abuzz with activists lampooning the order as a good-for-nothing move that doesn't even begin to fool the international community for whom Biya is pandering. A certain Commander Tiger has been shot and killed along with 5 of his associates in Batibo. They were killed by unknown assailants. The ADF has condemned strongly allegations of any responsibility of such barbarism impugned on ADF forces. In a statement issued Saturday, ADF spokesperson Ivo Tapang, while expressing condolences to affected families, fully attributed the executions to La République du Cameroon, particularly highlighting the fact that stripping the killed fighters half naked to expose their odeshi is consistent with past executions done by La République du Cameroon. Strident anti-ADF voices are hardly bought by the statement, but it should be recalled that General Ivo had called on ASC fighters to return ADF weapons that were seized during what was supposed to be a friendly meeting of camps. That warning was neither heeded by the ASC sympathizers or the ASC, that has reportedly continued disarming, kidnapping, and imprisoning fighters like General Arke in BOYO, or killing soldiers as it did with Tiger elements a couple of weeks ago in the southern zone. Meantime, a spokesperson for ADF has categorically rejected having any associations at any time with a certain General Divine in Meme State.
Everyone knows that General Divine is the leader of the Sword of Ambazonia, who with its leader by the name Bell in China. General Divine has never worked for the ADF, has no relationship with the ADF, neither is she working under the ADF.
General Divine has been accused severally of beheading many women, asking for ransoms from Ambazonians across the state, and even killing fighters under his command who dare question his orders. You're listening to Ambazonia Calling, and I'm Innocent. We'll be back with more stories.
Restoration train is going to the mountains. Restoration train is going to Bamenda. Restoration train is going on to BOYO on the restoration journey of our liberty. Restoration train is moving very steadily.
Have you bought your subscription to the Missions Tribune newspaper yet? Log on to missionstribune.com. Sign up at $34.99 for the home delivery of the only American newspaper covering the Ambazonian Revolution in great detail. $34.99 for a full year. If up to 2,000 Ambazonians subscribe, the Missions Tribune newspaper will provide, free of charge, a full year's subscription to all members of the United States Congress, guaranteeing that the Ambazonian story takes a front row seat on Capitol Hill. Subscribe today. The price is only $34.99 for a full year. Log on to themissionstribune.com and subscribe. It is the Amba thing to do. Don't go anywhere, BOYO Innocent, before you have provided us with the second part of our news wrap-up for the week.
Cameroon news agency CNA is reporting the deaths of 3 of 6 villagers shot by colonial soldiers of Cameroon in C village, Mwa, in the northern zone of Ambazonia. CNA further reports that the cattle of a certain Pitanji were taken away, supposedly by the same forces, while setting several houses on fire, breaking Saturday. CNA is also reporting the abduction Friday of 2 students, male and female, from Government Technical High School Bamenda. They were reportedly picked up by 2 men on a motorcycle late afternoon on their way from school in the Mile 4 neighborhood. There are no updates on their whereabouts as at this time, and their families, CNA reports, are still struggling to get in touch with their abductors. A nurse, popularly known as Mama Alice in NGOKETUNJIA state in the northern zone of Ambazonia, has been shot by forces of La République du Cameroun. Sources say she was shot on the foot for reportedly providing care to Ambazonian restoration fighters. The targeting of the cleric and medical officers has been a trademark of Biya genocidal forces. Honorable Aya Paul Abine has survived what was reportedly an attack on his person and home Friday. The former La République du Cameroun Supreme Court judge managed to escape unknown elements who reportedly destroyed part of his property. The sitting judge was previously arrested and locked up by La République du Cameroun for several months and discharged without any guilty pleas or apologies from La République du Cameroun on orders of President Biya. Finally, the security agency of the Ambazonia Governing Council, AGC, has reportedly uncovered that Cameroon's ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C., Mr. Etondi Esumba, signed in September a 30 million francs a month non-refundable fee to secure advisory services with the Glover Park Group, GPG LLC. According to the ADF press release, the Glover Park Group will provide government affairs and communication services and support services to the embassy and related agency of the government of the Republic of Cameroon with regard to its relations with the United States and relevant multilateral institutions. The group has offices in Washington, D.C. and New York, as well as a Twitter handle at Glover Park Group that Ambazonians can use to express their utter disdain in hiding the atrocities of the Biya genocidal regime. I'm Innocent Chia for Ambazonia Calling.
This thing will go on for 50 and 100 years. You cannot kill everybody. And even if you kill everybody, the stones would avenge for the blood that spills on them. The soil will get up and start fighting.
You have plenty of show yet to come, so don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
The people of West Cameroon cannot be your slaves. The people of West Cameroon are not, you did not conquer them in war. The problem we have in West Cameroon is the problem that will bring down Cameroon. When people have had pent-up anger and pain, humiliation, for over 50 years, when it bursts out, you will never be able to control it.
They will sooner realize that the people of Ambazonia will not surrender. They will sooner realize that you can arrest and kill, but the more you arrest and kill, the more you energize the people's spirit.
The orders by the United Nations Security Council for violence to stop in the Cameroons means that the colonialists from Yaoundé will never ever win any victory against Ambazonia. The only victory they could ever win would have been of a military nature. If and when violent conflict ends, Ambazonians will revert to the force of argument, using peaceful, non-violent, legal and diplomatic means again to deny consent to be governed by Yaoundé, accepting jail rather than surrender our right to self-determination and outright independence. Lambert Mbom has our editorial for the week, focused on the heroes of Amberland.
What are we to make of chants of we are winning and winning bigly? What does it mean to be winning fatly, Trumpian style, in the midst of the genocidal violence unfolding in Ambazonia? What do social media activists of Ambazonian descent mean when they recite these slogans, even as carnage is visited upon denizens of Bui State? Is it the case that Ambazonians have become accustomed to these gory spectacles? Has death lost its sting on Ambazonians? Are Ambazonians developing hearts of stone in the face of the barbaric scorched earth policies that have seen cowardly colonial soldiers burn down nearly 200 Ambazonian villages, killing old and young men, raping and looting as they go along? Hundreds of thousands of Ambazonians are sheltering in forests, competing with monkeys, baboons, and other beasts for wild fruit and prey for survival. Hundreds of thousands have been internally displaced, with tens of thousands forced to paradoxically seek refuge in the enemy's backyard. So how are we winning, and for that matter, winning fatly when the news is so bad? One quick answer is faith. Ambazonians, even in their darkest hour of doubt, have shown the kind of faith that led Christ to heal the sick by merely saying, "Go, your faith has made you well." Ambazonians are closing one of those dark moments, similar or comparable to Peter's darkest hour of fear and desire to survive, when at that bonfire on the night of crucifixion outside Pilate's court, he denied Christ thrice. There is some palpable sense of disillusionment, with many an Ambazonian wont to ask, as did the Israelites in the Old Testament, if only we had died at the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, as we sat by our kettles of meat and ate our fill of bread. But you have led us into this wilderness to make this assembly die of famine. In such moments of doubt, some Ambazonians can be forgiven for yearning for the days of the past when the hegemony of the slavery under La République seemed to be better than the sufferings of the present moment. In Ambazonians' moments of doubt, we must look to the sacrifice of the many thousands who have paid the ultimate price. The thousands who have been injured, raped, tortured, thrown behind bars for no just cause. They are the true heroes of this revolution. Along with the volunteer self-defense of freedom fighters on Ground Zero and the diplomats for Ambazonia and their diaspora, these heroes are the ones who give meaning to winning fatly. Nothing good comes easy, and the good thing called a free and independent Ambazonia will be no exception. The quest for the restoration of the independence of Ambazonia will not collapse just because the ranks of Amber boys are infiltrated with the mushrooming of fake Amber boys. As with the magicians in the court of Pharaoh in Egypt, who tried to discredit the Lord by performing rival acts of magic, fake Amber boys paid by the colonizers continue to stage kidnappings, hostage and ransom taking, acts of extortion, and even beheadings. The regime is working hard to cash in on the mess its fake Amber boys have created. In the course of the week, the regime posted a message on WhatsApp, taking on the voice of Ambazonians on Ground Zero, calling out those dying for our homeland to be free and accusing them of being responsible for these crimes, and threatening to turn them over to the colonizer, as well as threatening to return to the house of slavery, that is the Biya regime. It is a ploy no different from the so-called demobilization, disarmament and rehabilitation program launched by Satan Biya. From the Bilingualism Commission to the Disarmament Commission and the release of 289 Ambazonian prisoners of conscience who should never have been arrested in the first place, Biya and his thugs must truly think that Ambazonians will rush to these political bribing schemes like the biblical dogs eating from the crumbs falling from the master's table. The colonialists are grossly mistaken. Ambazonians have come a long way and there is no going back. To borrow from the famous movie, there shall be no retreat, no surrender. We must celebrate all who have rejected the cosmetic window dressing measures Biya and his bunch of comedians are toying around with. No matter how long our main prisoners must languish in the dungeons of La République, they must learn from Nelson Mandela. The true captain must be the last to leave the vessel. Ambazonian leaders must live by the faith in the hymn in honor of Catholic martyrs in England, which professes, "Our fathers, chained in prisons dark, were still in heart and conscience free. How sweet would be their children's fate, if they, like them, could die for thee. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death." We hail you, the Maxwell Obens, going blind in jail but standing strong. We praise you, the Terence Penn, Mancho Bibixi, Patrick Ndango, Tassan Wilfred, Fongalanfo, Seseko Ayuktabe, and all of you, too many to possibly list in this editorial. Keep the faith. Take comfort in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who pointed out so brilliantly that it is only in darkness that we can see the stars. You are our stars. Your courageous acceptance of the sacrifice you pay is fuel for this revolution. It is a price we must pay for a free and independent Ambazonia. A luta continua. Lambert Mbom for Ambazonia Calling.
Still ahead in this edition, we have the Devil Unmasked with Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta. We have a winner of the Nyamfuka of the Week. And we are not done until you have heard our letter to Joshua. So stay tuned, kick back, relax, and enjoy Ambazonia Calling. This is an Ambazonia Calling exclusive. We have top-notch information on what the international community led by the United Nations is planning to do next to help bring about the resolution of the crisis in the Cameroons. Here to share that information with you is Barrister Manjong Judambe.
A major international dimension is about to be introduced in efforts aimed at resolving the ongoing war in the Cameroons. Based on impeccable sources speaking exclusively to Ambazonia Calling, the international community has made it unequivocally clear to the Biya regime that the crisis will not end unless the regime climbs down from its high horse to acknowledge other stakeholders. It is the most humiliating thing the Biya regime suffered just before it was asked of the rights to host the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. Represented by ambassadors and leaders of international organizations based in colonial Yaoundé, the topmost demand made by the international community is for the Biya regime to put an end to the senseless war it declared on Ambazonia. The regime is also being summoned to immediately grant access to humanitarian assistance and food aid to benefit the internally displaced. Further demands is for the regime to free all, and I repeat, all prisoners of conscience, not just some prisoners.
Right now, we're able to get access to prisoners that are held in the Ministry of Justice. But what about the other prisoners held in, let's say, other types of detention centers? We need to have 100% access across the board, across the country.
Mr. Biya's regime has also been ordered to terminate all manner of legal proceedings against those they describe falsely as terrorists in order to mask their crackdown on political dissidents and reformers. These demands are the most bitter of pills the Biya regime is being asked to swallow. They are also the biggest threat brandished against colonial Yaoundé. The international community has been unambiguously clear in stating that should colonial Yaoundé reject these demands, it will leave them with no choice than to evoke the responsibility to protect, under which unilateral intervention will be ordered and initiated with or without authorization from the Biya regime. They are also calling on the Biya regime to show support for all initiatives aimed at bringing about a cessation of hostilities. To that end, the international community tongue-lashed the Biya regime for failing to grant permission for the holding of the Anglophone General Conference led by His Eminence Christian Cardinal Tumi. Even if no one is under the illusion that such a conference, held in BOYO, without the participation of the government and pro-independence activists, would yield any meaningful results.
The United States government has consistently condemned the use of violence on all sides, and has called for national dialogue without precondition. Each act of violence renders dialogue more difficult, but all the more necessary. We have offered to join with others in the international community to facilitate the start of a dialogue.
It is a position that was already clearly and publicly articulated by the United Nations resident coordinator in the Cameroons, Ali Grab Maria del Pilar Bauchi.
The UN has, and along with most of the international communities, has asked for dialogue and has encouraged dialogue. So if this is an initiative that will start dialogue and initiate dialogue, then yes, we're going to support it. But of course, to work, it needs to have the support of all the parties. So if it's done in isolation and it doesn't have the encouragement either of the government or of the secessionists, then it will not go very far.
The international community wants the Biya regime to stop pretending that the crisis in Ambazonia does not exist. Rather, they want Colonial Yaoundé to acknowledge that there is a major crisis, one of the few since the founding of the Cameroons that looks likely to destroy it if left unattended. This is a position the U.S. Congress has made no secret about.
At this point are not encouraging. It's clear to see that the situation is worsening and that we want to make sure that Cameroon is not the site of a civil war or doesn't become a humanitarian crisis. The government must recognize that it's facing a real national crisis and that the international community is watching. And activists must realize that peaceful, nonviolent protest is the only way to get people to hear their cause.
The other request made of the Biya regime is for Colonial Yaoundé to recognize that it must get ready to speak directly with Ambazonians, those showing support for the regime's effort to accelerate what it calls a decentralization agenda and the demobilization, disarmament and rehabilitation program. The international community urges the Biya regime to not overlook demands for a return to a two-state federation, and even more importantly, demands for outright independence for Ambazonia. Linked to this particular demand is the push for the Biya regime to acknowledge that the environment in the Cameroons is not conducive for hosting talk, dialogue, and mediation aimed at resolving the Ambazonia crisis. To that effect, the international community has made plain to Colonial Yaoundé that such talks will have to be convened outside of Cameroon and held preferably in another African country, likely South Africa or Ghana. The above notwithstanding, two conclusions reached by the international community should be a vexation to the Ambazonian spirit. The first is that the international community, in seeking alternative escape routes out of the war, has decided to invent a women's peace initiative that it is skillfully using and marketing. This has taken the form of shameless lamentations held in BOYO, Limbe, Bamenda, Fundong, Bali, and Batibo in recent weeks. These public lamentation charades have been mentioned in nearly all statements by representatives of Western democracies, including the United Nations coordinator to the Cameroons.
I think we need to hear the people talking. And I refer to the initiative of the women because I think we need to hear the voice of the people saying we've had enough and we want solutions. It shouldn't only be the UN saying it or the ambassadors.
The second vexing issue for Ambazonians is the fact that the international community says it is unable at this time to articulate any support for independence. The main reason is that Ambazonians have not provided the international community with concrete proof and irrefutable data that it is indeed the will of an overwhelming majority of the people of Ambazonia to split from colonial Cameroon. The only consoling factor here is the fact that the international community limits its reluctance to support for full independence for Ambazonia with the phrase, "at this time." What Ambazonians present as massive support for independence or ghost town campaigns is being interpreted as only made possible by threats of violence. This is Manjong Jude Ambe for Ambazonia Calling.
Welcome to our special interview segment, The Devil Unmasked, The Truth Out. Welcome to The Devil Unmasked, Professor Emmanuel Tatamenta.
Thank you for your welcome.
Our topic today is, I'm looking for my notes here. Could you please remind our listeners what we are unmasking in this edition while I pick up my notes, please?
For today, we are unmasking the international politics of the Ambazonian restoration struggle.
And what exactly do you mean by international politics?
Ntumfoyn, international politics or politics in general is a word whose definition has troubled mankind for centuries. What most people use today as the definition of politics comes from Otto von Bismarck, who defined politics as the art of the possible.
Otto von Bismarck, by the way, is the German leader who built the Prime Minister's Lodge in BOYO, just for the information of Ambazonians.
Scholars like Professor Harold Laswell define politics in distributive terms. For example, he defines politics as who gets what, when, and how. Unfortunately, this only serves the interests of those who see power as sharing the spoils of politics, or the politics of poverty. My intellectual orientation, Ntumfoyn, however, gives me the opportunity to define it differently. In other words, politics means the struggle to seize, consolidate, and use state power.
From your definition, is it the case that Biya seized power from Ahidjo instead of Ahidjo handing it down to him?
Ntumfoyn, I will categorically say yes. Contrary to common knowledge, President Biya benefited from the International Monetary Fund and President Francois Mitterrand's coup d'etat against President Amadou Ahidjo. Let me give you some reasons. First of all, Ntumfoyn, President Amadou Ahidjo had become scornful of the International Monetary Fund and refused to subject Cameroon to grabbing loans and privatizing parastatals to meet the agenda of international capitalist sharks supported immensely by the International Monetary Fund. Secondly, Ntumfoyn, President Amadou Ahidjo had saved Cameroon's oil money amounting to about some $950 million in chemical bank in New York instead of putting it in the operations account in the French Treasury in Paris, and stubbornly refused to bring it back as demanded by President Francois Mitterrand. The third reason, Ntumfoyn, is that President Amadou Ahidjo had some economic policies that countered French imperial interests.
I am loving where you are going with this. Can you expand on this a bit more?
President Amadou Ahidjo, for example, Ntumfoyn, had already come up with his Cameroon Shipping Lines and Cameroon Airlines. These companies deprived France of the monopoly of using French ships and airways to convey Cameroon cash crops to European markets according to the colonial pact signed by Ahidjo himself in December 1959. Since some Cameroonians had shares in those parastatal companies, it was therefore an affront to French economic interests in the country. This rise of a Cameroonian economic bourgeoisie defied the Yalta Imperial Treaty of 1941 that enjoined colonial states never to allow former colonies to develop. Since that Cameroon was already a middle-income country, especially because of the growth of those parastatals and their productive capacities, the French director of the International Monetary Fund at the time, Michel Cambrissieu, therefore connived with French President Francois Mitterrand to flush out the scornful and toxic President Amadou Ahidjo and enthroned the malleable Lucifer Paul Biya to help lead Cameroon's economy at the behest of international capital.
The French carefully selected and trained Lucifer Biya, right?
Lucifer Paul Biya was groomed and parceled back to Cameroon in 1962 to shadow President Amadou Ahidjo and protect French interests in the country. And you can readily understand why Lucifer Paul Biya was very spiteful of Vice President John Gould Froncha and Prime Minister Augustin Ngomjoua, who had supported Southern Cameroon's economic nationalism to the detriment of French interest in that land.
How exactly did Biya consolidate power to the point of becoming the emperor that he is today?
Ntumfoyn, Lucifer Paul Biya hurried to consolidate power by villainizing President Amadou Ahidjo and his cronies as soon as he was enthroned president. Let us move a bit down memory lane. Paul Biya and his treasury looters sucked President Amadou Ahidjo's body-clothed military and civilian supporters into a failed coup d'etat whose counter had been prepared very meticulously in advance by his Israeli backers. As soon as the coup was quashed, Lucifer Paul Biya proceeded to consolidate his grip on power by enacting a power-mongering kleptocracy excluded and marginalized Ahijo's northern power brokers, except a few mealy-mouthed folks like Bubabero Maigere, to conceal the irritating exclusion, and gave the military the free rein to become part of the corruption industrial complex in that country.
Where were the people of Ambazonia in this?
The southern Cameroonians, Ntumfoyn, as you know, were simply shoved to the side as undesirables and people only good as objects of ridicule, oppression, annihilation, and crass exploitation. You can now understand, Ntumfoyn, why today the petit boulofangs are decreed and sold to the international community as the best intellectuals, best managers, best politicians, best soldiers, best gendarmes, best policemen, and name it, to consolidate Lucifer Paul Biya's death grip on power. You can also readily understand why intellectual deadwoods like decreed Professor Pascal Charlemagne Mesanganyamding can boast that the Betis are the most brilliant Cameroonians. Wonder shall never end.
It's simply laughable to think of a people as the most intelligent people. But, what have we not seen in Cameroon? How does Biya succeed in deceiving the international community, including, people like the European Union, the African Union, the United Nations? How does he succeed so easily?
Ntumfoyn, the truth of the matter is that neither the European Union nor the satanic French Cameroon colonization and colonialism are idealistic. Both have always been driven by economic strategic interest. That is why it was very easy for Hitler Paul Biya to rob the United States of America of all countries on earth, for instance, into the struggle against disaffected northerners or highway robbers called KUPE de route in an imaginary war on terror in Cameroon. The United States unfortunately supplied drones and trained 3,000 soldiers for the Rapid Intervention Brigade that are annihilating southern Cameroonians and burning their homes with impunity, contrary to the Leahy law that forbids the use of American military aid for such heinous activities.
Let's take a look again at the manipulation of the United Nations.
For the United Nations, Paul Biya uses the French veto power and its internationalized corruption industrial complex to mute voices against state terrorism in the Satanic Republic of Cameroon. Can you imagine, Ntumfoyn, how dumb the United Nations can be to be silent when its symbols are being used around by the Satanic Republic of Cameroon with impunity, and the United Nations cannot even say a word? What crime against humanity has the Satanic Republic of Paul Biya not committed in that country and in West Cameroon or Southern Cameroons? But the United Nations and other organizations and only claim we are watching the situation closely.
It looks like the European Union also does not see beyond its own interests in Africa and in the Cameroons.
For the European Union, Ntumfoyn, all they want is a desperate African criminal Hitler like Paul Biya who can auction the natural resources of his country and even those of a neighboring country like Southern Cameroon for a pittance. The European Union prefers the snake oil auctioneer Lucifer Paul Biya to Ambazonians boiling with nationalistic zeal to develop their Amber land.
Let us turn to the African Union. Why are they going along with Lucifer Biya?
For the African Union, Ntumfoyn, France controls 14 statelets that swear to the French flag. Anyone who dares France like late Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso or Laurent Gbagbo of Côte d'Ivoire is exemplary smoked out of power mercilessly. French errand boys like Lucifer Paul Biya are therefore very conscious of how not to attract the wrath of their French motherland as a trade-off for their political survival.
What message have you got for the international community that today seems so insensitive to the plight of the Ambazonian people?
To the international community, Ntumfoyn, I would say simply that conspiratorial silence renders no great benefit to any nation, whereas liberty for all nations is the only principle by which humanity will ever be saved and live peacefully. That is the pillar on which the Amazonian national resistance unshakably stands. No body, no targeted killings, actions, looting, extortions, and so on, no bribes can bend that Ambazonian iron determination to consolidate their restored statehood.
And to your Ambazonian people today, what message have you got for them?
Ntumfoyn, despair and frustration from mindless exterminations shall not shake our overwhelming belief. And that belief is that the resistance mounted by the Ambazonian people is the only way for our total liberation from the satanic French Cameroon and international conspiracy to keep us in perpetual bondage.
I wish we could carry on, but I'm afraid that is all the time we have got for today. Thank you very much, Professor Emmanuel Tata-Mensah, for being such a well of knowledge for Ambazonia Calling and for the brave and fine people of Ambazonia. Have a wonderful and productive week.
Ntumfoyn, thanks for having me. A luta continua, victoria et certa.
We must go and use every forum that we have to remind the world that the people of Ambazonia are being massacred and slaughtered on a daily basis, and the time has come for the world to rise, and that the world must now begin to speak about the question of Ambazonia and their right to self-determination.
There are two Cameroons that came together. If you are telling us that what happened in Cameroon is like dropping a few cubes of sugar into a basin of water, who is the sugar and who is the water?
Doubting Thomases who think that this is a battle which will be concluded through military action will discover to their shock and chagrin at once that it will not happen.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Accusing fingers will be pointed one day at the United States of America for providing taxpayer funding, equipment, and training for the elite killer squads that are perpetrating the genocidal violence in Ambazonia, a situation in which France found itself in the lead up to and during the genocide in Rwanda in 1994. Here is Stonebrook.
For nearly 10 years now, America and Cameroon have been parties to a major counterterrorism partnership in Central Africa. The aim of the partnership is to defeat Boko Haram Islamic terrorists, to isolate and defeat ISIS in West Africa, as well as to track down and defeat rebels of the Lord's Resistance Army believed to be hiding in the forests bordering Cameroon and the Central African Republic.
At how our approach is to Cameroon, it has to kind of divide. One is the counterterrorism and counter-environment extremism. And then the other side is the domestic political reforms.
There is nothing wrong with cooperating to overcome terror. The fear is that Cameroon's elite force, known as the B, trained by American Special Forces, funded and equipped by American taxpayers, may be abusing their training, funding, and equipment to target Ambazonian civilians and political dissidents. Here is the Representative Karen Bass questioning a State Department official on the floor of the U.S. Congress.
So we give Cameroon security assistance.
Yes.
So what do we give them and what do they use it for? We don't give them assistance for elections, but we give them assistance for security, and then there is problems.
The accusation resurfaced that American resources are being used to crush political dissidents in Ambazonia. Acting Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau for African Affairs at the State Department, Ambassador Donald Yamamoto denied any such misuse of anti-terror partnership equipment in Ambazonia while testifying to Congress.
So you're not concerned that any of the equipment or resources that we provide is used inappropriately against the population?
And that's one of the
You're not concerned about that?
On the equipment and materials, we track it. And that's something that we've required our embassy and also our DoD colleagues to do.
One fact that is not in contest, B officers are at the forefront of the genocidal violence and scorched earth policies of colonial Cameroon and Ambazonia. B officers trained by American tax dollars are also members of Cameroon's killer squads, targeting and killing political dissidents, burning down entire villages, perpetrating extrajudicial killings, sometimes using equipment believed to have been funded by American taxpayers.
We are told that the drones that the Americans gave to be used to fight the Boko Haram are being used for their heat-seeking searches of people that are being used in the Northwest and Southwest.
The U.S. Congress has expressed worry that the Leahy Law, which bans the use of military and security equipment provided by the United States to violate human rights, may not be adhered to.
These are basically training and making sure that they have capacity building within these units and that they are completely Leahy vetted and that their focus and the materials we provide is for countering terrorism.
Officials of the U.S. State Department hold that no such violation has occurred, as with French officials accused of involvement in the Rwanda genocide. American officials should worry that when the history of Ambazonia will be written, America's good name and reputation stands an even bigger chance of being brought into disrepute. It is uncertain, even for the most senior State Department official on Africa, to ascertain that troops trained by American Special Forces and equipment provided by American taxpayers are not used in furthering the genocidal violence in Ambazonia.
We've only trained part of it, and the part that we have trained, they're improving their operability, but also that we emphasize human rights. We have not trained all of the BIR, the BIRs, or the rest of the military forces or the gendarmes, but we're doing the best we can to train as many as we can in this context.
Ambazonia Calling wonders if the State Department's account to Congress was entirely precise on the troops trained. For example, B trainers sponsored by the U.S. have trained others, meaning that those trained by the trainers are indirectly trained by America. Also, how can the U.S. dissociate itself with crimes against humanity committed by B officers by simply explaining that they did not train everyone at B? Although State Department officials claim that they can track the military equipment they provide to B to ensure that it is not abused in the violation of human rights, how can one trust them at their word when the summary execution of the 2 women and their children in northern Cameroon proved to have been done with U.S.-supplied military gear, according to the most publicized accounts out there? The most worrying situation would be to wonder if the Ambazonia issue is like the killing of Saudi journalist working for the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi.
We have offered President Biya and his government that they must reach out in an open dialogue without any preconditions, and that we, the United States, will offer our good offices to help negotiate and bring both sides together.
Might it be the case that Washington ranks human rights a distant second to the anti-terror partnership with Cameroon? Might that also be the reason why the Pentagon has decided to stick with Cameroon on military cooperation? Ambazonia Calling urges all Ambazonians, notably those with American citizenship, to raise these concerns with their members of Congress. It is running afoul of American values to even be seen as putting human rights and human dignity second to any other priority. This is Brooke Stone for Ambazonia Calling.
Ambazonia Calling. You are in the heart of the news shrine. Call us the Kalakuta Republic of Commentary, Opinion, and Editorials. The Ambazonian restoration quest may have finally hit code red, the point at which all the lights are flashing red. The danger is great at this point that if nothing is changed in approach, the entire restoration quest could unravel. Here is Willie Bratade with the main dangers Ambazonia faces at this moment.
There are four main dangers that could seriously jeopardize the Ambazonian quest for independence. The first is the setting up and running of military-style camps deep in the forests aimed at training fighters and then deploying them to fight against better trained and better equipped colonial troops. Having these camps is the equivalent of holding territory, which cannot be successful without significant sacrifice in human life. Converging in camps in one location in the depth of the forest is like a mother hen gathering its chicks in one spot. For the hawks, that gathering can only make the hunt for prey easier. Some of these camps have seen the number of fighters balloon ever since the Cameroonese government announced the creation of a disarmament committee. Imagine what will happen to these brave Ambazonians if the colonizer were to discover the locations of these camps. The second danger is in the form of so-called reconciliatory meetings organized on ground zero and aimed at building a common front to fight the colonizer. While some of these efforts are sincere and have been shown to work, others are simply gimmicks used to entrap unsuspecting and impressionable patriots, such as the one which led to the capture and trial in a kangaroo court of General R.K. and his imprisonment for the rest of the revolution, according to a release from his captors. If this can happen among Ambazonian groups, it is not a stretch to imagine that the agents of the colonizer working to round up and kill self-defense fighters will start using such meetings in the future to accomplish their odious mission. Our advice is that any invitees to such meetings should do their due diligence and through solid intelligence ensure that they know what they are walking into before they accept to participate in such a meeting. The third danger, made particularly significant by the launch of the Disarmament Committee, is the lust for money. It should be recalled that the young men and women who took up arms last November when Biya declared war against our people were not motivated by money. They did so out of patriotism, out of a desire to defend themselves and their communities against the Cameroonese marauders. Nobody forced them or paid them to join any self-defense group. They volunteered their services and were prepared to sacrifice their lives for their country. Sadly, some have started fighting for whoever pays them more, paying allegiance to their paymasters instead of fighting for a cause they once believed in, which is freedom for Ambazonia. So, all those fighters who have gone rogue and have started using the revolution to extort money from fellow citizens, all those who have abused their position in order to enrich themselves, and all those in the diaspora who are sponsoring the corruption of these brave Ambazonians on ground zero, all of you should know that the colonizers are experts at this game. After all, has Cameroon not been consistently rated one of the most corrupt countries on the planet? So, all those fighters who used to be members of SOCADEF or ADF but were so easily bought over to join the ASC or AMF or any other force and vice versa, should remember what the Bible says in 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, in their eagerness to get rich, have wandered away from the faith and caused themselves a lot of pain. End of quote. The colonizer will offer money that these self-defense fighters can only dream about. Should they fall for the temptation, they will, for the majority of them, be walking directly to their own graves, and by that token will be dealing a terrible blow to the revolution. The fourth and maybe the biggest danger facing this our independence restoration quest is the failure by leaders of the revolution to return to basics. Before this war was forced on us, this revolution was a non-violent, peaceful, legal, and diplomatic campaign in which the force of argument was the choice of the people over the argument of force. The international community will spare no effort to achieve a return to peace in the Cameroons, and they will achieve it in part by rounding up and pressing charges against anyone believed to have perpetrated violence or atrocities. The time has come for Ambazonian leaders to regroup and devote energy to design and the publication of a roadmap to recognition that consists of keeping Ambazonians mobilized and working with the same zeal and determination to achieve independence after the end of open hostilities. The moment is coming very soon when Ambazonians will be able to prove through their denial of consent to the colonizers that they are determined to settle for nothing less than outright independence. This is Willibrod Ade for Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people. Sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in BOYO. There is more flashing red in the form of assimilation through federalism, something that Ambazonians may be tempted to applaud through a process of a referendum, something that Ambazonians may want to welcome, but which represent grave danger for our independence quest. Here is John Akuru explaining it.
These Western powers have come together and planned a new strategy to enslave us and make sure that we never ever have the opportunity of rising again to demand that which, to ask for that which belongs to us. According to this document, the French government has carefully crafted and is working behind the scenes to convince the United States of America to adopt that document and to convince the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland to also support that document so that they all come out now and gang against us. And the signs of what is contained in this document are out there already. According to this document, the French are planning to impose on Cameroon a 4-state federation. They have observed and are clear that the so-called effective decentralization of 10 states will not work, will not be accepted, will not be swallowed. The second point is they are also admitting that a 10-state kind of federation or decentralization kind of thing with elected assemblies and governors and everything is going to be extremely costful for La République, and that some of the regions now, if transformed to be autonomous and on their own and all whatnot, may not have resources to be self-sustaining, and that is really going to pose a problem. For that reason, they say to make sure that they bite into the federalism narrative and build a federal base that will, easily get into all of this. They now want to come up with a 4-state approach. I'm sure a good lot of us listened to the first secretary at the French embassy in Yaoundé give hints. They were just hints. But the real truth is, this is what they plan to do. Create a state which will bring together the North, the far North, and the Adamawa region. Of course, they are culturally linked. Naturally, that state stands with no problem. Bring the next state that will bring together the center, the south, and the east. Of course, they are also culturally linked. No problem. But the next state will not be littoral and west, because they say the argument is the people of the littoral and the people of the west, the culture is not the same. They have a lot of things that don't really bind them together. So for that reason, the other 2 states will involve the northwest and the west, because as they hold it, the people of the northwest and those of the west are all grass fielders, share a lot in common, and so it will make sense for those 2 entities to form a state. And then the next will be the littoral and the southwest, because the people of the littoral and those of the southwest share a lot culturally in common that they will naturally fit together. The key objective of this breaking is not just for the sake of peace in Cameroon. It's because they want to move to the next stage of our assimilation. Since they could not obtain it in a unitary state, they now want to change words to make us believe that the ideological difference of going to federalism and then giving us some autonomy and all whatnot is going to help. And the real thing is divide the northwest and the southwest. Put them now in other little structures where they know the majority population of the littoral will dwarf the people of the southwest region. The majority population of the people of the west will dwarf those of the northwest region, and make sure that at the end of the day, what they could not achieve in a unitary state, they will achieve now following this particular pattern. This explains very vividly why you had that outing by the first secretary at the French embassy in Yaoundé. That is why the United Kingdom is getting more and more prone in that manner to see how they push, that kind of narrative into our minds to perpetuate what they had done way back in 1961. That is why the United States of America is now trying to bring various stakeholders together and find out coyly if at all such an approach could find roots in our midst. This is a serious danger. We have to fight it very hard before we suddenly find the international community coming to tell us they want to organize a referendum which will involve all Cameroonians around this kind of project. That will be calamitous.
When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes a duty.
You cannot defeat our brave soldiers because they are warriors in the land of their birth. They have courage, they have determination. They've got nothing more to lose.
We don't do foolish, but when there are capital fools out there, we make it our duty to find them, and every week we crown one of them the Nyamfuka of the Week. Veronique Vitimfe has got our queens and kings of foolish for the week.
Finishing in third place this week are the conveners, supporters, and members of the self-appointed Parliament of Ambazonia. This week, they issued invitations to an event aimed, amongst others, at fostering collaboration among Ambazonian liberation movements. What is a great goal is messed up by being initiated by a parliament born of the same political scams that facilitated the Zaria Mafia. Why stop? Why not use its own illegitimacy to grant legitimacy to the self-declared government for persisting in demonstrating to the international community the extent to which so many are only anxious to appoint themselves into positions of power? The promoters of the unelected Parliament of Ambazonia are this week's third place finishers for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
In the position of runners-up this week is an activist who this week once again demonstrated the extent to which he's dying to raise himself to the rank of Supreme Commander of the Ambazonian Revolution. For the nth time this week, he returned to and tried to justify the absolute stupidity that led a member of the self-proclaimed interim government group to invite attack on United Nations personnel and equipment anywhere in Ambazonia. While many Ambazonians have recognized how close such a call comes to the invitation by Osama bin Laden for his followers to bring the head of the UN Secretary General to him for $25 million, Eric Tato took to the air this week, trying desperately to justify the foolishness. Not satisfied with just doing foolish, Eric Tato insulted fellow Ambazonians at the helm of liberation movements without exception. He threatened those who do not recognize the self-proclaimed interim group by next January 5th of a takeover by activists under his leadership. For throwing away the only moment of lucidity he has shown in this struggle, when this week he also found the wisdom to denounce kidnappings and extortions on Ground Zero. Eric Tato once more crowned himself runners-up for the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
Winning the crown this week and doing so way ahead of anyone else in the running is a Douala-based barrister at law whose positions on Ambazonia have been on shifting sand for a little while. This week, the learned barrister joined journalist Mimi Mefo on Equinox TV.
That is certainly a positive move.
Very positive move. I think it's a very positive move. I encourage the government in that direction, and I ask them to go ahead and release Ayub Tabe and the others. Let them call on their fighters to drop the weapons.
Barrister Emmanuel Ashu Agbo went to the extent of suggesting that the 289 released means every Ambazonian held in detention has been released.
When he gives this type of amnesty, it is a positive response that will encourage those who are in the bushes to come out and say, well, our head of state has made a gesture to forgive those who have wronged the state.
He conveniently forgot that thousands of Ambazonians are still being held in jails, prisons and dungeons of colonial Cameroon. Barrister Emmanuel Ashu Agbo claimed that it would suffice for Mr. Biya to release Seseko Ayok-Tabi, for the latter to call on fighters to drop their weapons, and it will be done. Barrister Ashu Agbo even went to the extent of mocking Seseko Ayok-Tabi and his closest collaborators for reminding the military tribunal during their last appearance that they are Ambazonians, not Cameroonians.
Although the people said I know Cameroonians, but I know that it's just a bluff. We all know they are Cameroonians. His territory comes from my village, and you see, we all know they are Cameroonians, and so the head of state should carry out this positive move by releasing all of them so that peace can come back to our beloved nation.
For dropping the veil that he is a supporter of Ambazonia's independence, for unveiling himself as a secret supporter of the one and indivisible Cameroon, for making a fool of himself on national TV, by contradicting proud Ambazonian heroes, for denying Cameroonian nationality. Barrister Emmanuel Ashu Agbo is this week's undisputed winner of the crown of shame, the Nyamfuka of the week.
Nyamfuka them all.
This is Veronique Vertimfe for Ambazonia Calling.
Have you bought your subscription to the Missions Tribune newspaper yet? Log on to missionstribune.com. Sign up at $34.99 for the home delivery of the only American newspaper covering the Ambazonian Revolution in great detail. $34.99 for a full year. If up to 2,000 Ambazonians subscribe, the Missions Tribune newspaper will provide, free of charge, a full year's subscription to all members of the United States Congress, guaranteeing that the Ambazonian story takes a front row seat on Capitol Hill. Subscribe today. The price is only $34.99 for a full year. Log on to themissionstribune.com and subscribe. It is the Amber thing to do. The Biya regime was hoping to get some credit for releasing 289 supposedly Ambazonians arrested in connection with the campaign for the independence of Ambazonia. His decree freeing them from jail was simply laughed at, as Jude Agua Ozugen now reports.
It would be a lot easier to try to find a needle in a haystack than to hope to find an Ambazonian who has only praised for the Biya regime's decision to release 289 prisoners. The regime should get no credit for cutting loose the chains they unjustly shackled to the 289 citizens concerned. Chris Ano, Secretary of State for the self-proclaimed interim government of Ambazonia, is now dancing. He told the Voice of America why the release of the 289 citizens is a known event. Remarkably, Chris Ano wanted the free world to know that even the release of Ambazonian leaders held on terrorism charges will not end the campaign for independence. Nothing the colonialists of the Republic of Cameroon do will change anything in the determination of Ambazonians to pursue the restoration of independence. It is important to signal that the decree issued reluctantly by the Biya regime came only at the insistence of the international community. The release falls far short of the demands made by Western governments. The governments calling for the release of political prisoners include the administration of President Donald Trump of the United States and the government of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. One of the most important demands that has been made on the fast-collapsing Biya regime is for them to stop making the ridiculous claim that those they have rounded up arbitrarily and are detaining in violation of their rights are terrorists. No one believes that there is even an iota of proof to back up those baseless charges. Only the kangaroo courts of the colonialists can ever be expected to even entertain a hearing on such frivolous charges. Members of the U.S. Congress agreed with top officials of the U.S. State Department that those arrested, detained, charged, or convicted on these trumped-up charges are really not held for terrorism. Rather, they are held on political witch-hunting charges. The release of 289 is but another flat-out silly attempt by the Biya regime to manipulate Ambazonians and the international community. This is not the first time the regime has tried this nonsense. It did so in the early days of the consortium. As in this latest example, the regime staged their release in the hope of obtaining credit. They failed then, as they will fail on this occasion as well. The Biya regime must be made to dance to its fabricated crimes. One way to make sure that the regime pays dearly for its crimes is for lawyers representing the newly released Ambazonians and all other abused Ambazonians to file court cases against the Biya regime. This is Jude Agua Ozugen from Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia Calling.
Because you have your army of occupation out in West Cameroon, you believe that when the people will rise, even if you took the whole of the French army and added to yours, you will never bring them down.
And I call on all Cameroon soldiers to lay down their arms within Ambazonia and to turn their arms against the very system that has made them slaves in the land of their birth.
One more note about what Western powers are planning to do once peace returns to the Cameroons. Back Mr. Biya's plans on decentralization and tried to discourage Ambazonians for gunning for independence. That's when we need to stay the course, as Devayanje now reports.
every Western capital interested in Ambazonia, London, Washington, D.C., Ottawa, Paris, Berlin, as well as the leadership of the African Union and the United Nations have signaled their availability and determination to pursue 6 key steps once the guns go quiet. The very first priority of Western powers is to ensure that everyone arrested in connection with the political campaign for a free Ambazonia be freed from jail. All prisons, those known officially, as well as those held in dungeons across colonial Cameroon. The second priority for Western powers is to facilitate the provision of humanitarian assistance to the millions in need of it. Over 3 million people, according to some accounts, as part of an effort to arrest the descent into full-fledged civil war in the Cameroons. The third step Western powers have pledged to take is to throw their full weight in support of efforts to organize an inclusive dialogue, with nearly all Western capitals offering to play a mediating role in any such talks. A fourth priority that Western capitals are promising to pursue with leadership from the United Nations is to demand accountability for all those responsible for war crimes and human rights violations. The fifth priority is to create a space for non-violence, peaceful, and legal pursuit of reforms. Ambazonians will hear the West stress ever more frequently the end for non-violence, which will call for remobilization of our people to stay the course. As a result of their lack of appetite to see Ambazonia emerge as a new nation, these capitals will be backing the Biya regime's plan to move forward with its pledged decentralization program. It will take sustained mobilization and a clear action plan uniting a majority of Ambazonians to take advantage of the peaceful space that will be created for new protests calling for independence, a sustained campaign to deny consent to Yaoundé, and an insistence and persistence in calls for independence. A patient but never tiring campaign is what will be needed to prove to the rest of the world that Ambazonians want nothing of that one and indivisible Cameroon. This is Divine Angie for Ambazonia Calling.
This is Ambazonia. One nation, one soul, one people, sacrificing, bleeding, and yes, dying if need be, until we kick the colonialists out and enthrone a government of the people in BOYO. The number of Ambazonians driven from their homes, now internally displaced or completely driven out of their country and seeking safe haven in refugee camps, notably neighboring Nigeria, is growing by the thousands. According to the United Nations, those numbers have tripled in the last 6 months. The situation is likely to get worse before it gets better, unless, of course, Western countries open up their doors to welcome and host those refugees. Here is the monk.
700 days and counting since the Coffin Revolution started January 2017 in the Cameroons. The numbers of Ambazonia citizens fleeing their homes for safety elsewhere keeps rising, creating a refugee problem in neighboring Nigeria. In a briefing at the Palais des Nations in Geneva last month, November 2018, UNHCR spokesperson Baba Balouche gave an update on Ambazonia refugees in Nigeria. Registered number was now at 30,000. Another 21,000 are currently living with host communities in over 50 localities spread across an area of some 45,000 square miles. Ambazonia citizens are being sheltered in the Nigerian states of Akwa Ibom, Cross River, Benue, and Taraba, mostly hosted within local communities. 4 out of every 5 of those registered so far are women and children. The question now is, what to do with these people?
So the most important thing is to provide that safety, because asylum and treatment of refugees has been a noble tradition since the beginning of the civilization.
That was UNHCR spokesperson Baba Baluch in a Sky News interview on World Refugee Day, confirming that asylum is a de facto humanitarian service to refugees in a civilized world. But as the refugee crisis persists, who is really to blame for the genesis of the problem and who should solve the problem? Again, UNHCR Baba Baluch.
Imagine 42,500 people fleeing every day of last year, and even this year when we have new conflicts erupting here and there. Where is this going to end? So the call is to sit down and resolve it. Otherwise, help humanitarian organizations like UNHCR. I mean, for us, this is a political failure at a big scale, and then we as humanitarians are dealing with the consequences.
This is the monk from Ibalikumato, Vadrukov himself, for Ambazonia Calling.
For more stories from around the world, go to the World Wide Web at themissionstribune.com, compassfreepress.com, and africafreedomnetwork.com.
Here is our letter to Joshua.
Dear Joshua, I hear the World Bank has not been very kind to you of late. What happened to the smooth relationships you once had with them? Why do they have to tell the whole world about the fact that development projects implemented in the Cameroons cost 6 times the amount charged for similar projects in economies of similar size and context, such as Morocco and Cote d'Ivoire? Why is the World Bank surprised? Are they the only institution that does not yet know that project costs multiply by 6 in any country where the dictator remains in power, whereas he should have returned to the ancestors in the loneliness of the grave 6 feet below? This is what happens when these World Bank people don't honor their commitment not to meddle in the internal affairs of the Cameroons. What is their business if you borrow the money and use it only to achieve 1/6 of the objective? Should they not be happy to lend 6 times more money and make 6 times more profit in the process? Why can't these World Bank people recognize a good business model when they see one? Now that the World Bank people claim to know that projects in the Cameroons cost 6 times their actual value, shall the World Bank reduce the loans owed by the peoples of the Cameroons by 6 times, given the fact that they only get 1/6 of the value of each loan invested? You bet no. Speaking of an organization that meddles in your internal affairs, can the World Bank not copy the example of the United Nations, which has committed to never say a word to condemn the nearly 6-decade recolonization of Ambazonia by the Republic of Bread and Sardine? The World Bank should have known that corruption hates publicity. How do they expect you to survive now that they have told the entire world that your projects cost 6 times the cost? Next time you quote a price, someone is going to want to cut it up by 6 parts. Don't they know at the World Bank that it costs 6 times more to live at the Intercontinental Hotel in Geneva versus living in Gola? I mean, you got to make the money somehow. One has to admit that it is all your fault, Joshua. You brought this whole thing on yourself. How come you gave golden bribe gifts to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, and you gave absolutely nothing to the World Bank president? Do you think that the World Bank chief eats stones? Yes, I realize this is very embarrassing. What were you thinking? Who are you trying to convince? Certainly not the people of Ambazonia, who are out there heckling you with cries like, "You're just the show, Joshua." The World Bank does not respect and certainly does not understand the saying, "Le Cameroun, c'est le Cameroun." Why are World Bank people so jealous? Have you told anyone that staff of the World Bank are paid at least 6 times more than staff at the public service in the Cameroons? Then why are they all over your business, telling the world that the project costs 6 times more? Are your citizens complaining? They are shielding you from all the shame. They cannot even protest their indignation. Unfortunately, it just happens, Joshua, that you pay civil servants 6 times less, even as you charge 6 times more. Tell me, Did the multiplication by 6 of all bills also apply for all bills related to the infrastructure for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations that never will be? No doubt it led to your people wasting 6 times more time building that infrastructure, leading ultimately to the rights of hosting that competition to be yanked from your country. Now you probably have to wait 6 years or 6 more tournaments before you get a chance to host again. I have to admit that the fellows at CAF, the Confederation of African Football, who took away the hosting rights from the Cameroons, did not check with the World Bank. They would have learned that because you charge 6 times the cost, you should also be given 6 more years to complete the projects. After all, you get 6 plus 1 for every presidential term. On another note, you should rejoice instead of cursing the World Bank. They are not used to counting the costs accurately. If the World Bank did count costs accurately, they would have probably found that projects in the Cameroons cost a lot more than 6 times more. If you doubt what I'm saying, just rewind a few years back and you will find the years when the World Bank repeatedly reported that Nigeria was Africa's second biggest economy after South Africa. Overnight, just overnight like that, the World Bank reported that Nigeria had not only overtaken South Africa as the continent's first economy, it also has doubled the wealth of the South African economy. Go figure. I am very tempted to call all of that voodoo economics, but I'm afraid that if I do, you might be tempted to consult the same witch doctors of Vomuka, Sangmalima, and Ebolowo, whom your people consulted and offered sacrifices to for you to win, for you to steal the last presidential election. If voodoo truly worked, you could have used it to blind the World Bank from not seeing the fact that you charge 6 times more for every development project. But what do I know? Did you not prevent the World Bank from recognizing that it costs at least 100 times more to build a second bridge over the Vuri River than to build a similar bridge in the United States? That is how come the French are building that second bridge on the Vuri River for the same price as Americans use for the construction of the bridge over the Chesapeake Bay in Delaware, here in the United States. Talk of a scandal. Why am I not surprised? Le Cameroun, c'est le Cameroun, right? It is the only country where a young man like Von Mukete would be forced into early retirement at the youthful age of only 100 years. This is the only country in the world where political deadwood is alive and kicking. It is the only country in the world where the dictator running for re-election organizes and attends 6 times fewer campaign rallies than anywhere else in the world and proclaims himself the winner of the vote with 6 times more stolen votes than the candidates who won the popular vote. It is the only country where Ali Baba has already put his 40 thieves from the Council of Ministers in jail, but still has 6 times 40 similar thieves serving in various capacities in high office. It is the only country in the world where every thief in government is called back to help themselves to public resources at least 6 times before they are finally found out and thrown in jail. It is not only with project costs. Leaders in this S-hole of a country, I don't mean 6 times, just S-hole of a country. Leaders in this country date and marry women 6 times younger than their eldest children. It is the regime whose soldiers shoot at least 6 times at point-blank range into women and their toddler children during extrajudicial killings meant to punish them for being 6 times not guilty for the crime for which they are, however, executed. Cameroon is the land where, on the 6th of April, some abortive coup d'etat happened. God knows citizens of this country would have been saved the damnation into which they are condemned right now had the 6th of April worked. Cameroon is the land where, after killing 5 religious as part of the war in Ambazonia, the regime is now out hunting for the 6th missionary it needs to kill to ensure that the cost to missionaries is at least 6 missionaries shot dead. It is the country where the leader is also 6 feet below in the land of the dead, but lives on, lording it over the living, even those who claim to be 6 times more intelligent than the clowns in power. Did I mention that this is the 6th time I have called out your foolishness at pursuing a war in Ambazonia that you are bound to lose? Did I say you are 6 times more stupid than any leader I know of? Please don't tell the World Bank I said so. They will not appreciate. All this would be funny, Joshua, were it not so tragic. You have been listening to Ambazonia Calling. We came to you from our studios here in Washington, D.C. Our producers today, Jeff McCoy, Logistics, Joe Costa, and Krista Cunningham. Our music is from Ken Wanaku, the monk, from Balikumato Vazekov himself, from William Ford, an Amber music star of blessed memory, from Eric Matisse on the web at soundimage.org, and from Prince Ajwa Alem of Ajam, Sonicatron, USA. Ambazonia Calling is a joint production of Africa Freedom Network, the Missions Tribune, and Compass Free Press. You can find us on the web at missionstribune.com, at compassfreepress.com, and at africafreedomnetwork.com. Next Sunday is another date. Until then, keep the spirit, keep the faith, keep up the good fight for justice and independence for Ambazonia. Stay Amber strong.